Good morning, everybody. Jerry Johnson, how are you? Good to see you, man. You're for front and center. Welcome, everybody. Andrew Morgan here with the CyberCNS team. Tim Fournette, good to see you. Ian, how's New York? We will get started in just about another minute, and I'll get things kicked off. Hope everybody is doing well. All right, Shiva, you ready if I kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Good afternoon, Tim. Or late night. All right, so welcome everybody. Good to see you. If you're new, my name is Andrew Morgan. I help the CyberCNS team on the go-to-market. We've been doing these partner calls, Shiva, over 2 years now, hard to believe. And the format is pretty much the same as we started. Shiva is going to kick things off on what's new. He typically has a deck and goes over some updates. I'll monitor chat. I do have to tell everybody I will do my best with chat because I have to jump in the car and pick up my son from something. So I'm just being transparent with you all. So I'll probably have to rely maybe a little bit on Shiva as well with this today. And then we'll just open it up for general Q&A after Shiva goes. So Shiva, with that, let you take it on over.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'll just do a quick presentation, but as we discussed last time, so I'm just going to basically kind of walk through a few things, and then I will talk about. So here is basically where we are. So as of today, all users basically were migrated. We found 3 specific issues with respect to the technology that we're using in AWS cloud with Kinesis streams in terms of certain limits that we were hitting. We essentially have rolled out new agents, and basically there are a couple of fixes that are going out right now. And basically there were a couple of issues with the external scan, which also are basically being resolved. So these essentially will solve some of the issues that we basically we think are more of teething issues that were there as we move to the cloud. And now basically the stream seems to be moving clean, and basically we have not seen any major issues in terms of the tickets that are coming through. As I said, so these are essentially the things that we've done. So what we've done is that, for example, with the CIS, we now have a view which essentially shows you whether it is IG1, IG2, or IG3. It is basically live in your instance, or it will basically be shortly. And second is that we also, in the reports, we essentially give you the classification of which is IG1, IG2, IG3. So that is essentially there. The new external scan integration, we rolled it out and then we rolled it back again because we thought there was an issue. And as I explained on one of the groups, like we had an issue with AWS actually throttling us because they thought we were essentially sending out traffic, because the way that the new external scan agent works is that we run it in a Kubernetes cluster. So all of the outbound traffic is going from a single IP, which is basically a NATed IP. And because of that, AWS basically thought we were basically trying to run some sort of a spam bot or whatever it is. And so essentially they throttled us. And so now that throttle has been removed, right? And then we've also basically updated the lightweight agents, and the final update, which basically makes it real time, is basically scheduled this week. So that also will be there. And then we already have essentially got we are in the process of rolling out the next step, which is you can create any reports or filter any user interface based on the tags that you have put in. So I think this was basically a long feature that was basically being asked for a very long time that basically finally we have got. So which means that when you create a report, you are going to have the ability to define whether you want to just create a report as it is right now, or you can essentially kind of specify a OS level filter, company level, you anyway have a company level filter, OS level filter, a tag level filter. Now the tag essentially could be any tag that you've attached to an asset or any of those pieces. So based on that, essentially we'll have this. The second thing that we essentially wanted to understand from you is that would you also require, so we have tags for assets, we have tags for all of these pieces, right? Now the only question is, for example, if I take a report like Active Directory reports, then how do you want to see filters working in the Active Directory reports is something that we wanted to essentially get feedback from you, because then we can essentially implement that for all of those pieces. So we basically almost like 70% complete in terms of these items, and the remaining essentially will be rolled out in the next day or two, because we were a little behind because of essentially solving the problems with the external scanner and basically working with AWS on these pieces. As I said, next week, one of the biggest things that's happening is basically we are reworking the notifications. So this essentially is the big item for next week, and you will essentially see this live this weekend. So you should be able to kind of get this in this week. And as I said, in the end of this month, we basically are going to have all of these integrations. I have a list of integrations that a lot of you have sent in, and we have basically taken into note all of those pieces. So we are essentially working on those integrations. We basically, for example, in backup, we've got Beam. We basically have other unit trends. All of these essentially are already put into the pipeline, and we are essentially working towards getting all of those integrations into place. The one thing which a lot of people are asking for is basically their own custom URL, which is what we call as the vanity URL. So even for hosted instances, we're getting the vanity URL. The way that it is being implemented is that you will have the ability. So very simply put, see, right now, we essentially have the front end, which is basically a WAF, and then behind it, we have AWS Guard Duty. And then behind that, we essentially have our the CDN, and then all of these services which run within the VPC. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to put an external facing Nginx server, okay, which we secure, and essentially we do a proxy pass to the actual domain, and that is how essentially we are going to implement the vanity URL. If any of you think that there is a better way to do it, I'm absolutely open to it, but this is essentially the solution. So you will be able to go to your instance and essentially set it up. And when you set it up, essentially we go and configure the Nginx host that we have in the front end, which will then basically pass all the data through that. So it becomes another endpoint that we have to manage. But I think since a lot of you want your own URLs, then it is basically better that we essentially provide it this way. And basically, we are working on the new report builder, which is basically much better. And one of the things that we are essentially doing is to basically make it more scalable. We are also basically going to be able to we're going to expose the Elastic SQL, and we are looking at other reporting tools that we can bring to the front end, which removes some of the limitations that you have with Kibana. So one of the things that we are looking at is basically also providing, in addition to Kibana, an ability to interface with Apache Superset, where you can write your queries and essentially kind of bring graphs and other kind of visualizations also into play. So this is something that we are working on actively at this particular point of time. And this was something that we talked about last week in terms of how we want to provide value in terms of assessment, continuous vulnerability assessment, and these are all the pieces that we want to. But the most important thing that I wanted to do on this particular call, as I said, was essentially to kind of get feedback from all of you in terms of what we should be doing over the course of the next first 90 days, then basically over the course of the next year, and the course of the next 2 years. And the reason I'm asking this question is not because this company, when we set up, right? It basically was like Tim, Dennis, all of you were there. We basically started with the ideas that this group came together and basically gave us. And we basically are in the process of now, essentially, as I said, we are in the process of trying to raise funding and basically getting new investors on board. And what we are trying to do is to basically, when we talk to our investors, we are more invested in making sure that the MSP space that we are in is overall successful. And it is not just about, yeah, we basically created a company and then we basically made money and walked away, right? That is one part of it. And as I said, when we make money, all of the people who have contributed will also basically get rewarded by that. But the more important thing that I want to bring forward is I want to basically go back to our investors who basically are also heavily invested in the space and basically feel for what we need to be doing. And I want to understand from you in terms of what are the things that we should be doing, say, for the first 90 days. So for example, I can tell you, if I were in your position, the first thing that I would say is that I know that document sucks. We already have that list saying that documentation needs to be in order and we need a complete documentation department. So that essentially is put there. And as I said, we've already taken action on support and moving support to the US so that it is more friendly and basically it's more real time, and moving support to a more real time model in terms of chat rather than having to basically kind of open tickets. These are changes that we are already making. Now, above and beyond that, should CyberCNS essentially continue to just be a compliance and vulnerability tool? Because we started at vulnerability tool, then we essentially slowly did also compliance, and a lot of people started using compliance. We started patching initially. I remember there was a lot of resistance to patching, but now looking at the amount of interest that patching is generating in terms of people coming in and trying it and then giving us feedback, we believe that people want more of patching, and we probably have to basically cut the umbilical cord with Chocolatey and basically do it ourselves in terms of being able to give the full value of the platform. And then beyond this, what do we do? So if I could talk to everyone openly about certain things that people are talking to us about, right? When we go to people, the people tell us, okay, you guys have all of this data in here, and if you just pull a few more logs, then essentially I don't need another SIM platform to be there with me. Now, I don't know whether that is right, wrong, or whatever it is, but if you look at it, we do have Elasticsearch. We can expose the Logstash out there, and we can bring those data back, and we can essentially give you the dashboards that are required for SIM. Now, I'm looking for the collective intelligence of this team to say that whether we should do that or we should not do that. Second, how far can we go once we do compliance? The second thing that we want to be able to do is, like, everybody wants to do CMMC. Is it the right thing for us to essentially become the enabler for CMMC in terms of saying, okay, here is how you can get CMMC certified? Should we partner with somebody who can do the audit portion while we automate the entire data gathering portion, and basically then be able to hand it off to an auditor who can then sign off so that you can get CMMC certified? Is that something that would be interesting to you, to everybody who is there on this group? So these are some ideas that I wanted to just throw out to basically understand from you, because as I said, what we value more than anything else is the like your direction in terms of where we should be heading, rather than essentially saying that we have decided to do this and do everything that we decide to do. So with that, I'll actually shut up and basically let, if you folks can actually come on audio and basically talk about it, then it would be great actually, because we could then kind of have a discussion and then come to a conclusion as to what are the things that we should be focusing on. Tim, can I request you to start? Because
sure, guys. You know, if you go back to the other slide, there's, you know, a lot of things here, and I feel like maybe we still haven't, you know, completely locked down the continuous vulnerability assessment for some people. And my opinion is, let's, you know, instead of being a Swiss Army knife, and do a little bit of everything, but maybe not be the best. I'd like to see you guys be the best continuous vulnerability assessment platform there is, and lead, what that means. That feeds into things like compliance assessment and, your cloud posture and, all the other things. Patching, I feel like is a tangent that is probably taking some time away from you. The system is very good at determining whenever things are vulnerable. I don't think it should necessarily be the thing that fixes a vulnerability, because there's a lot to be said about that separation of duties as well. You don't want the system that says you're compliant to be the one that makes you compliant, because people are less likely to trust it. I mean, all that said, feeding information to other platforms that do these things. So if we can tell an RMM that we have a vulnerable application, let the RMM figure out what to do about that.
Understood. So, Tim, I hear you in terms of see, we do not want to go down the side of basically becoming yet another RMM. But there are two parts to this conversation, right? One is essentially that you have a tool which essentially now, I think it also depends on the maturity of MSPs, right? So if I essentially take, if it's a smaller organization where basically they have, say, a few clients, etc., then the way that they probably are looking at it is to essentially say, can I have one tool which can solve, say, X number of problems, so that I don't pay for 4 different tools to do that. The second is basically larger organizations which are more mature, etc. They already have established tools, and they believe that we should integrate with those tools in order to be able to be right. So, for example, I can give you an example. Like, for example, there is F12 in Canada. So they essentially told us that we want patching, but the way you will do patching is to basically not auto patch everything, but you integrate with my RMM, where you tell my RMM to do the integration. But I want essentially that 360-degree to happen with this tool. And that was one of the reasons they wanted that this tool, they would buy this tool if they basically got that kind of a 360-degree. So that's where I wanted to essentially kind of so we are in a dilemma right now, honestly speaking, as to what direction we should take. And your feedback is well taken. So I can go down the path of being the best vulnerability tool, but what happens is that what we talk about, like, okay, after 6 months down the line, then if it is only doing vulnerability management, is it worth this, right? And how do I essentially also increase the USP of this tool so that it becomes valuable for everyone else, right?
Yeah, I think the value comes from what your vulnerability assessments is doing in the ecosystem of things that the MSP is using. So if you're able to give actionable information to other systems, hey, you're out of compliance, this is what you need to do to get back in compliance. Don't necessarily do those things, because I think that when you do those things and then the system reports back you're compliant, you're losing a little bit of trust, because you lose that separation of duties. But there's a big roadmap of things that can be done in terms of educating an MSP, especially a less mature MSP, on how do you remediate these problems.
Tim, if I could just share one thing. I mean, in the enterprise, upper mid-market enterprise space, more and more of the vulnerability management tools are incorporating remediation. So I'm interested to, not sitting here saying you're wrong or right, but it is interesting when you look at VMDR from Qualys, from Vicarious, and there's another one that's escaping me that has tremendous market share. They're doing remediation. So you're not seeing separation of church and state in terms of identifying vulnerabilities and remediating, at least not at the enterprise level.
All right, this is Dennis. Sorry, yeah, I understand. I agree with what you're saying, Tim, but I also see this perspective that Qualys has had tremendous success, integrating patching into the system. I think maybe the answer is to keep some separation so that, first of all, it's an optional tool that if you want to basically stay focused on the vulnerability management, then you can do that. But like we work in co-managed environments more than most MSPs, and there is value to be able to provide the capability to an IT admin to say, well, look, we found all these patches that are missing, and to be able to basically click something and push those out does have a tremendous amount of value. So I think both perspectives are valid, and maybe the answer is to separate them out enough so that you can basically focus on just the vulnerability management if that's what you think is the best for your organization. But there also could be room for the ability to do some patching. I think there's some value in that.
Thanks, Dennis. In fact, the whole Qualys VMDR platform, if you really look at it, basically has, in the last 2 years, they're focusing heavily on that we help you fix it rather than basically just telling you that there's a vulnerability. That's kind of the messaging that Qualys has started moving towards.
Absolutely, and they've had tremendous success. They put a lot of basically they've put a lot of money into moving toward that model. And really starting with their release of agents maybe 3 years ago. So that does seem to be the trend. It's and there are two arguments to that. One of the arguments that I've heard is, well, if you go to the doctor, you don't go to one doctor for diagnosis and another doctor for treatment. You basically want those things to be integrated. So I think you could argue it both ways.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Shiva, and I think this is what you're saying, you're going to provide options. If you don't want us to remediate it, don't do it. If you want your RMM to do it, do that. Is that fair? That's
correct. So because all I'm trying to do, Andrew and everyone, is basically saying that, but if we actually get the infusion of funds that are there, then we will be able to create specific teams that go out and do certain things and basically make this product even better. So that's the whole idea. So I am basically taking back feedback so that I can talk to whoever is the investors to say, this is the pathway that we're going to take, and this is what we're going to take. And I want each one of you to essentially kind of be aligned with that concept so that I just don't go and say, I'm going to do this, and then that has no value for the people on this call. Because as I said, that is most important to me, that we are aligned on this before we basically make commitments in terms of putting resources onto different pieces to areas that are most useful to people, rather than saying that it's interesting for me, so I'm going to do it. So that's one thing. Second is that what we are seeing, and I want Dennis, you can tell me, because the point is that what I'm seeing recently, at least in a lot of the assessments that we are doing, that people are doing, they are asking for almost all of the data that basically is required from a SIM, like where people want it to be running for a couple of days, get the logs, and tell me what are the kinds of changes that are occurring in the network. So that is also becoming kind of a part of the whole assessment. And so we are having to pull all those logs. We are anyway pulling, for example, login, logout, Active Directory logs. Now, essentially, we are in the process of getting all of the data from the network devices, because without that, we can't correlate changes that are happening. So for example, people are making changes on the firewall in terms of users, etc. We have to pull that data, because again, they say, if you are a vulnerability management system, you need to have this data. So we are pulling that data. So when you kind of put all that data together, you are basically approaching what most of the SIMs are doing today. So is that basically something that, and the second thing is that the whole part about the whole passive listening concept, right? So if I have a passive listener on the network rather than just the active listener, if there is a new IP that is sending data across the network, then I can immediately go and figure out what is the new IP and then basically say that I found this asset on the network. However, today I'm doing sweeps once in a while. So if a device comes in between a sweep and leaves between a sweep, then I don't catch that particular device. So that is basically an open window that I'm leaving in terms of continuous vulnerability assessment.
Another concern I would have about SIM is just the cost. It's not cheap to store all those logs. What would that do to the cost of using the platform?
So that's where we want to essentially make sure that we basically keep the cost exactly like how it is, or basically make it just something which is marginal, not something that is exorbitant. That's basically if we take on this challenge, that is the challenge we'll take on, to make it really cost effective. So where it's a flat rate and it is not basically something that you have to worry about saying that this basically is going to cost me X or Y, because otherwise there's no point, because then you can buy any other SIM that's there in the market.
It's a difficult problem. I think you would get different answers from different people based on the size of the MSP and, again, its maturity level. Larger, more mature MSPs have a lot of other tools. They may be running Aavik and Domotz and other tools. Some of the smaller, less mature MSPs would find a lot of value in being able to put all these things together, not just into one tool, but into one. I hate to use the term one pane of glass because it's been beaten to death, but essentially that is the concept of being able to consolidate things into one reporting system. On the other hand, you have to be very cautious about you're never going to be all things to all people. And so I think you have to proceed very cautiously. And at some point, maybe these are add-on modules, or maybe, just sort of thinking outside of the current system. But I understand that it is a dilemma. And I think there are different people in this call who would pull you in different directions, based on what makes the most sense to them.
And Dennis, to go back to where the trends are, certainly up market. When you look at like Nucleus as an example, the best of the best management platforms for vulnerabilities that are pulling in network infrastructure, API, code, etc., cloud, they're doing it with threat intel as well. And because they have to be able to look at what's being exploited actively and prioritize based on that across a massive number of endpoints and systems. So that's again where best in class is headed, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And I think to Tim's point, I think in a perfect world, yes, you want to have that separation of duties. You want to keep those things separate. I think in the SMB space, efficiency and being able to get things patched quickly is probably a greater benefit than I think. Again, in a perfect world, yes, you would have all those things separate. On the other hand, having them separate creates some additional overhead in terms of what you have to do to actually get things patched. So I think, particularly in the SME space, which is, again, that is a trend in the enterprise space, but in the SME space, being nimble and being able to get things patched quickly has a pretty high value. And perhaps, again, this is, arguably is a higher value than the benefit of having that separation of duties. I think a lot of also our smaller clients, if I had to weigh those two things on a scale, the benefit of, okay, this separates these things out, and what are the benefits of that versus, being able to move quickly and very easily and very efficiently, resolve the issues that we've identified, I would tend to go toward the latter.
Yeah, last thing I'll say is I couldn't agree more. Look, there was an article from on Travelers just right now winning a court case in Illinois about MFA not being employed. The customer said MFA was deployed correctly. Well, it wasn't. Guess what? They're not paying. So the claim. So, if we're monitoring, for example, O365 and MFA's turned off, again, for the SMB MSP, again, it's all perspective, but I think there's tremendous value in being able to alert on that, and the less systems, the better. But again, that's just one person's perspective.
I think sometimes it's a matter of get it done and get it done now versus get it done in the best possible way. And I think, in heavily regulated enterprise environments, you have to lean toward getting it done in the best possible way. With SME clients, I think sometimes get it done is a higher priority.
You're not going to have all the change control which you know, which continue.
Yeah, and the answer is going to be different for different people. And I think again, all these points of view are valid. So, maybe the solution is to, like I say, give people options and say, if your workflow is such that doing it this way is best, then that's the way you can do it. Or if you have this different workflow that includes maybe doing the patching, that's different. And exactly how you make that work, I don't know. But in the end, I think that's the only way you're going to really satisfy. There's a pretty diverse group on this call, and so I think, as I said, I think people will take you in different directions based on what is most valuable to them. So maybe you have to have some forks or divergences that allow people to go in different directions.
Understood. And I just wanted to respond to Mark and Jerry in terms of, so Mark and Jerry, we basically are fully committed to making sure that every single feature or integration that basically we put in is there. What we are trying to see is that as we expand the team, how do we essentially add more value so that for every dollar that you spend, you basically feel that you're getting more from this platform. That's essentially our goal. It's not basically to say that by doing this, we will essentially lose focus on anything that we're doing right now. And we've kind of kept that philosophy right from the beginning. If there is something that's not right in the platform, fix that first before basically releasing any new features or any of those pieces. So we've always basically kind of kept that as priority. So that being said, so the broad area that we are essentially kind of looking at is that if we can essentially, if you look at the identify space where we essentially say, I can identify everything in your environment, I'm able to basically kind of give you a very clean, up-to-date summary of what's wrong and basically a real-time view of if there is anything which is changed, which basically is concerning. And this tool is able to not just basically be a tool that just provides reports and different forms of reports, which it will, but also basically become something that can alert you when basically something is changing or not happening, which is based on the set policy that you have. Then it essentially, I think that is basically what we want to transform this tool into. And in doing that, we also want to see if what I wanted, as we brought the patching, whole piece of patching and these pieces into place. Now, when I'm basically gathering real-time information in terms of like we have done with DHCP logs, we're doing with other pieces, as we bring all this data in, eventually what happens is that I'm bringing almost all of the logs that essentially most of the SIMs are bringing. Of course, they bring everything. We are basically looking at more things like what is interesting, what is basically really valuable, and bringing only those pieces. Again, we are not basically getting into any of those spaces which concern an EDR or MDR, but we are more into what is required from a compliance perspective. Because when an auditor, when tomorrow you basically are audited and somebody says, why did I get breached in spite of this? If you have all of these logs and say that I have all of these logs and this is the reason for why things are, I was compliant from my perspective and I gave you all of this information, we want to make sure that all that information is available with any partner to deal with any kind of incident that occurs in the future. And if we do it, that would essentially be the that would essentially put us in the standard where we have helped you from a partner perspective. Because today I can give you reports which you go and present to people or present to your customer, but I still do not sleep well, because we want to be able to be that tool which essentially allows you to sleep well in terms of saying, okay, if there is a problem, this will let me know that there is a problem, and essentially I can go and fix it myself, or I can configure this tool to fix it up for me. Not everything will be fixed by the tool, but basically at least the basic things. If it is just a simple software update, either using the tool itself or by its integration with an RMM, it will essentially fix it up. So that way, when you go to a customer, you are in a position of control rather than essentially saying, I have to do this. I basically am missing this. Because today, I think most customers, the biggest problem we are facing is we are all going and talking to people about you have 10,000 vulnerabilities. And the customer, I think, is turning around to a lot of the MSPs and saying, yeah, and that's why I'm paying you to fix it up, right? So then the conversation ends over there. How do we essentially take this conversation to essentially say that what does this 10,000 vulnerabilities mean to you as to you customer, and what would happen if basically I was not there and you didn't patch these things? What would be the material loss that you would have in case you got attacked? I think that is basically somewhere we are kind of missing that link in terms of providing that value to you so that you can present that to the customer. And I want to understand whether any of you folks can help us bring that value. Again, with respect to be able to like do things like patching. We don't want to be the only patching system. We want to integrate with every patching system so that whatever you have in your environment, you can continue to use it. In case you don't have one, you have a simplified version of it, which we have. It may not have the 200 bells and whistles, but it will have the 20 pieces that are required for getting you compliant. So that's essentially what I want to kind of see whether that is something that people would agree upon in terms of a vision for what we have to do over the course of the next 12 to 24 months.
I think there are probably people who are not on the call that would have some feedback to provide. And I also think there are probably people on the call who have thoughts, but maybe don't speak up. Again, a mechanism, I know I forget what the name of the voting tool that we've talked about in the past, but a way of outside of this call of providing a mechanism for people to provide that impact and say, this is what would be valuable to me, and kind of see what the diversity is in that would be helpful.
So should I just create an open Slack group where people can basically put in their thoughts and we can consolidate and bring it back to the team, saying that these were the opinions that were expressed over the course of the week or 2 weeks, etc.?
Yeah, I think you want to kind of keep count what people are thinking, and having that voting system. We use Canny at Roost.
Canny.
And having those votes allows you to keep track of how many people are really interested in something rather than just a vocal minority.
Okay, so then I'll set up Canny and basically send it across to all the people on the groups and to basically all the partners. So then we can essentially look at what the feedback is on that.
I think Canny is a good option because it gives people the option to just quickly vote yes or no. But if they want to basically extemporate and add more comments to it, they can do that as well.
Yeah, and it'll integrate with Slack so people can see the topics as they show up and go vote.
Yep, I'll basically get that Canny set up and basically distribute it to everyone. But broadly, basically, I just wanted to understand if the broad direction that we're taking kind of makes sense, or it basically is like, as I said, like, because we'll basically make this a best vulnerability scanner. We are basically integrating new sources of data. We are enriching the data. We are basically making the reports thing, and we are creating the new user interface. I saw somebody ask whether this is the new interface. No, this is not the new interface. We just migrated the existing interface. The new user interface is basically scheduled to be released in the early next month, because it's undergoing a lot of changes. There's a lot of thought process that's going on to make it simple, functional, and basically, like earlier, most of our user interfaces are just like a loose collection of menus, etc. But this is a little bit more thought out in terms of actual workflows and what personas, people with different personas, and what does the user interface mean for that persona. That's basically the thought process that we're putting together. And so that's how we essentially have, we are doing this. So Dennis, yes, we are basically, we basically didn't enable one role. That role will get enabled this weekend because we have to do it for all the tenants. After that, you'll be able to kind of do this. Yes, Mark. And Derek, you raised your hand. You have a question.
Yeah, hi, long-time listener, first-time caller. I've been watching from the sidelines for a while, and we just kicked off a trial 3 days ago, so we're just starting this. We're a small MSP, we're sub $1 million, and this conversation kind of reminds me of some anecdotes and things I've heard over the years and things that you know we've tried to do with our business. But you know, it reminds me of the Henry Ford quote, like if you ask people what they wanted, they'd all say a faster horse before he built the car, right? And I think the challenge that you have is I'm not 100% certain what you want to accomplish as a company and what your target market is going to be. You know, if you want to go up market and work with larger MSPs, then you know, obviously, my opinion doesn't matter. And if you are like, okay, we want to be the pinnacle tool, vulnerability assessment and management tool for the SMB MSP, then that speaks to me, and I know a lot of folks that are looking for something like that too. So I almost feel like what Andrew Morgan has to say, oftentimes he's very dialed in a number of ways and a charismatic leader that understands where the industry is going. And you know, instead of being a bunch of developers that want to just sort of create things based on which direction people make comments, because it's very clear to me you have an interesting dichotomy of folks. You've got folks who are, you know, auditors only, who clearly don't get paid for remediation and don't care about that, whereas you have MSPs whose responsibility is to essentially audit the services that we're providing, right? And at the end of the day, our lines, you know, what our responsibility to our customers is different. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that, you know, asking us all to drive you is going to give you a bunch of people shouting in different directions.
No, I agree with you absolutely, Derek. But see, once we get all those perspectives, I think the more important thing is that there is a wealth of knowledge with this group, which we've been able to kind of leverage and improve the product over a period of time. Which basically, and also at the end of the day, as users of the tool, you basically kind of see what is useful and what is not useful. And the biggest thing that at least we've seen is that I've said this a number of times. For us, basically, the cost of development is lower than the cost of discussion, right? So we would rather basically kind of develop something, have people try it and say not useful, useful, etc. I'll give you a classic example, right? We basically kind of, there was a lot of thought process that was put into, like, we should have our own ability to define the different parameters for defining a risk score. So we actually put that out. You could basically define different parameters based on which a company risk score could be defined, and then asset risk score could be defined. So we actually put it out, and then we said, we developed it, we put it out, and we made it live. And then when we did the recent migration, we said, okay, how many of the people have actually modified the default settings? And then we found that it was basically some 3 out of the 1,069 partners that we have who had actually modified the settings. So we actually pulled it out. The moment we pulled it out, there were a bunch of partners who raised tickets saying that, why did you take it off? It was so nice, right? So we essentially kind of understand. So, but what we like to do is to basically kind of put features in front of people, ask them to basically play around with it. And if they find it really useful, then we will get metrics in terms of how many people are using it. If they're not finding it useful, then we'll basically phase out the feature, so that because that way what happens is, it's not that you can experience it, you can define whether it works for you or it does not work for you, but we can always basically kind of sit in a room and basically discuss till, as they say, till from dawn to dusk, saying that this should be the ideal product, but we may never get there. So we like to do these quick iterations, put things out, have people test it, and if there are enough people interested in it, we keep it, else we basically kind of close out that feature.
Yeah, that's a really awesome way to do it and to grow. What I would, add to that would be to make sure everybody knows this. If you have a new feature and it's going to be a new section of the app, mark it as beta or, whatever you want to use to show that this is something that we're trying out as a feature. Click here to give us your feedback on it. Let us know how it's working for you. Or if we should even keep it, and put that in the UI and make it visible. But that's really awesome.
Yep. So I think one of the things that is being brought out in terms of, again, I think one area where we are lacking is while we essentially talk about how you should be compliant, etc. I think we have to make a better job in terms of putting out. There are two pieces which we are working on, and my engineer Divin actually kind of came up with this idea, and he's doing this. In the report section, starting from the beginning of next month, we'll actually have two pieces, right? One is essentially the standard reports that you see, and the second piece will basically be what is called comparative reports. So what the comparative reports piece is going to be doing is it's going to kind of give you a report. Every standard report that you have, you basically say, give me, for example, the vulnerabilities report, okay, this month versus last month, or this month versus 3 months back. So that comparative reports basically we are building. So that is kind of an example of a feature that we kind of thought would be cool, useful for everyone, because every time you have to basically answer the question which said, yeah, today you are at this pace, what were you 3 months back, or what were you 2 months back? So we kind of taking that model, and that we were able to do because what we are doing right now is not just storing a report, but we are essentially taking the data, keeping a snapshot of that data, and then we are able to compare that data with the previous data and then provide this kind of differential reports for anyone that reads there. So those are examples of things that we will continue to evolve over a period of time. But as Tim said, we will basically start marketing those features as beta features, take your feedback, and we'll basically also in app itself, we'll provide the ability for you to provide feedback in app rather than having to resort to any of the other channels. And that way, what happens is that we can consolidate the feedback, we can discuss it over the calls, and we can decide whether that beta feature should go live or it should essentially be thrashed. So that essentially is kind of the model that we will take going forward. So I think we pretty much have, we have a lot of good feedback that we got from this thing. So what I'll do is I'll set up the CANI, and then we will essentially share the list of features that we think basically we want to talk about with everyone. And then if you want to add anything more, please add it over there. And then we'll essentially kind of take the votes. We'll basically kind of come up with so I just want to make it very clear. If someone is a small MSP or etc., we in fact basically value that more than anything else. So if we are valuable to small MSPs, we'll also be valuable to larger MSPs. So in this particular case, size does not matter. We want to be able to kind of, and one thing which I wanted to talk about is that I think one of the areas that we want to improve on is to be able to say that you basically say, for example, we give you a risk assessment score of B, and then we essentially give you a bunch of best practices that if you followed, you will essentially become an A. That part of it is something that we are missing right now. And basically that is something that we have to work on. So that's something that I'll put into CANI also. So as people vote, we will essentially kind of put this together, because I think we have a lot of data and the platform has become too much of data. But basically, I think we have to move it into something which provides more text in terms of insights and the ability to do certain things rather than just the data piece. The only other question I have for this team is that, like, a lot of times I've seen a lot of you basically saying that, oh, I want more details of the CV, I want more details of this, etc., which we are going to be giving you. But the question is, do you deal with CVEs as CVEs individually, or are you basically more dealing with it as saying that I install a patch and then it remediates a bunch of CVEs? Are CVEs really important from your point of view? apart from basically not just being customary, but basically at the end of the day, you can say that I have 10,000 CVEs in my hand, but the customer is not going to understand any of those CVEs. But from a MSP perspective, what is your take on like just giving a dump of all the CVEs? We always provide it, but is that basically the primary interface through which you operate your tickets and all of those pieces? Or is it about you fix this and then so many things will be taken care of?
I think the answer to that depends a lot on your compliance environment. I think for most MSPs, the CVEs are not something that people are going to spend a lot of time digging into the details of. But if you have higher compliance requirements, then, if you have external auditors, then that becomes a little bit more important. So I think, again, a drill down methodology where, that stuff is available, but it's not immediately visible so that you can dig into it if you need it is probably the best way to approach that. Also, I don't know what your options are with Canny, but when it comes to voting for things, it seems to me there are kind of two different, there's sort of the strategic and the tactical. And so, there's one part of where we're talking about sort of large strategic moves. Do we do this or do that? But then there's also this other part, which is just really, it's more like feature requests. Like, something like, the ability to mass delete tags, which is something that I've requested because I'm like, okay, if you inadvertently, apply a tag right now, you have to go in one by one to delete it. There's no way to mass delete tags. So, sort of, if there's a way to keep those things separate, I think it helps separate out the noise from over here is the strategic decisions, and over here is the feature requests that people can vote on and prioritize. Because there's going to be a lot of little things that people say, oh, it would be nice if it could do this or could do that. I think those two things are kind of different thought processes. And if we can separate those, I think that would be good.
Understood. And Dennis, like, for example, the ability to bulk delete a tag, I wouldn't even basically take it as a feature request. I would actually consider it as something that should have been provided in the first place that we are not providing. So that would essentially fall in the category of something that was missed. But I understand where you're going. So we'll categorize those, saying that these are basically, for example, for a 30-60 day sprint, and these are basically long-term objectives which we have to meet.
The last thing I want to say, and I've said this many times, is that just the appreciation, Shiva, of this process, which is, and I don't know if anybody else has ever been involved with a vendor and a product in this way, but I certainly haven't. And it's been such a refreshing experience. I know it's difficult. I know when you start taking feedback from a lot of different people, you get pulled in a lot of different directions, but I think that's still better than, having a small team of developers sit in a room and decide what everybody else wants. So again, my appreciation for the way you've built out this process and continue to manage it in this way.
Thanks, Dennis. But I think I should also thank every one of you, because if it is not for your feedback, we wouldn't have a product that, honestly speaking today, Dennis, I'll be very honest that we have done almost zero marketing, right? We have nothing that is spent on marketing. And what the partners that we get, they come, they trial it on their own, and then they basically come back and tell us that we want to pay for the product without any marketing or sales push. And the only reason that is working today is because we built it because of the feedback that you folks gave us. So I think we're reaching the top of the hour. So I want to thank each one of you for your time and your feedback. And what I'll do is I'll basically set up Canny, and I'll basically send out a link to everyone. And we will essentially kind of circle back. And then I will basically get that consolidated, and we can basically discuss this in the following calls. Hey, Andrew, any
Shiva,
last words?
this is a great call. Yeah, and I was going to say, great job as always to you and the dev team. Dennis, I echo your sentiments. And if you can get this recording available online, I want to send it to everybody also in the YouTube. I think it was a great call.
It's been an amazing journey, and it continues to be one.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Shiva.
Have
Thanks,
a great
Thanks, everybody.